Traveling the ether back to you, to a land so far away. I feel the distance in between.
Best episode since episode 3. I'm sorry, it's done. Last episode, say what you will, that was a cool episode in its own right, but I'm sorry, this episode just blew it out of the water for me. And it's hilarious that I'm saying that for a episode that really didn't focus a lot on anything major. I think the best episodes in this series are the ones that are more subtle, have fantastic direction, amazing music, great writing, and can make even the smallest things just so much more impactful. This is how I felt walking out of episode 1, this is how I felt walking out of episode 3, and this is how I feel walking out of this episode. And it's funny because last week, I saw that title, Survival Training, and I was like, oh great, we're going back into these slower episodes. I did not expect to love this episode as much as I did. I'm really curious to see what other people think about this, because I feel like I might be in somewhat of a minority about this episode. Like, I feel like a general consensus on this episode will be, yeah, it was alright, but I loved it. I loved this episode, dude. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and welcome to another Made in Abyss episode review. Today we are going to be talking about episode 8, Survival Training. Now, before we get into this amazing episode, I did want to make some comments on last week's episode. After letting it sit for a little bit, I have some things I want to say and some comparisons I want to make. Firstly, I feel like I was judging the story behind the fight a little too harshly. I know I said, oh wow, it was a test. Ozen, why you ruined the stakes for this fight? But thinking about it and looking back, I think mainly where my issues lied in the expectations and people hyping up the event itself more so than the story disappointed me. Like, if I went into that confrontation not knowing anything, I feel like I would have been fine with it. I would have been like, okay, Ozen was testing them, whatever. But a lot of people were hyping it up, not just people in my comments, but people on other people's videos and stuff, saying that this is where the series got really serious, where it got really dark, and I didn't really feel that from that fight. I mean, it was desperate, but I expected Ozen to actually be a threat or a villain of some kind, and she turned out to actually be a really, in her own way, really nice character. So I did want to clarify that. Looking back, I don't really have a problem with it being a test. It was mostly the technical issues, like the animation quality and all that. I still think that was weak as hell, but I can concede that the story part of it isn't that bad, really. It works. And second, in between last episode and this episode, I did read that chapter of the manga where they fought, and I can confirm indeed, I hate people who do this. Like, this is such a meme at this point. Oh, the manga was better. I hate that so much, but I do have to say, comparing the two side by side, the manga easily wins. And I think a lot of it has to do with how it's framed in the manga. Like, the way the shots are used and the impact of Ozen's punches and throws are felt so much more in the manga because of the medium it's in. Whereas I feel like the anime, a lot of people have been saying this, and I kind of see where they're coming from. I feel like the anime has been a little bit too faithful in the way that it adapts scenes, where it's like straight up shot for shot adapting the scenes. And you would think in theory that sounds great. Like, yeah, adapt this amazing material perfectly. But when it comes to translating a medium to another medium, sometimes you have to make changes to benefit the other medium more than you would have if you had just done a straight adaptation. So I think in this case, they should have put a little bit more effort into coming up with their own way of communicating the fight. And also, I think it also is just a budget issue. Like, they did not have the budget to communicate the artistic direction that not just that fight, but the entire manga as a whole has. Like, it has this cool water painting shading on it that really gives this horrific tone, even to like the most mundane things like characters talking. It's really cool. And looking back on the series, I kind of wish that they had embraced that a little bit more in the art direction for this series. But that's whatever. It's just a matter of comparing the art direction that both mediums have going for it, and I would say that the anime has a little bit less inspired art direction, at least in that episode. Anyways, with those comments out of the way, let's get into this episode. My god, we're right in the thick of things. We're in the forest. The survival training has started. We're gonna be here for 10 days, and I was right. They cut through a lot of it. We're pretty much done with this training by the half point of the episode. And there's really not much to talk about in this montage of sorts. It's kind of what you'd expect. It's survival. They're hunting and trying to survive in this wilderness. We see a new creature, which they don't actually name, but I found the manga page on Reddit. It's a hippo-like creature called an Adobasu. And you actually learn a lot of interesting things about why this thing is here, because we heard, oh, there's no dangerous things out here on the edge of the abyss. They're all in the center. But in this page, we actually learned some things about it that say it's only at the edge because it couldn't survive in the center with all of the other dangerous beasts. But this beast in particular is still dangerous in its own right. We also learn later that the reason they were able to survive is because they caught it, and the page says that if cooked with proper care, just one is enough to feed about 200 people. And obviously Rico and Reg aren't master cooks, but they did have enough material to eat and live safely for the 10 days that they were in the survival training. Before we move on from this though, I have to say, I love the animation for this creature. Probably the best Yoshinari animation we've seen on a creature in this series so far. And I'm really interested to see if people hate this one too. I'm sure they will, because, oh no, it's different. It doesn't blend with the environment. I don't care. This looked so cool. It was animated so well. The way the lighting bounced off the creature in the dark, it just looked amazing. This one scene with the Autobasu had more budget put into it than the entire Ozen fight. Plus, I love Ko Yoshinari, so that man can do anything and I'll love it. It actually almost makes me wish that this creature was just animated normally and Ko Yoshinari did some scenes in last episode with the Ozen fight. That would have been amazing. If you've seen any of his work on Little Witch Academia, you know what I'm talking about. The dude can animate some really weird and crazy things that would have fit that Ozen fight so well. Anyways, other than catching this Autobasu, there's really not much else to say about the survival training itself. Ozen and one of her apprentices or her squad members are overseeing Rico and Reg. They're not actually going to do anything if they're in trouble, but they're just looking at them and overseeing their progress. So that's cool. I did enjoy that little detail with Ozen's squad member on the tree. I wish I knew these guys' names. I'm sure it's in the manga somewhere. But I really enjoyed that little detail with him hooked up to the tree so that way he wouldn't fall. That was a nice little touch that a lot of anime probably wouldn't do. They'd probably just have somebody standing there and looking at them because who cares? I mean, Ozen's doing that, but it's Ozen. She's fine. Anyways, while viewing Rico and Reg, we actually get more of Ozen's flashback from last episode. A lot of people in last week's episode were saying, oh, they didn't show the best part of the flashback. What? Now we're getting it. And what a flashback indeed. Probably the best flashback in the series so far. I don't really know how many flashbacks there's been, but I could say that this is one of the best scenes in the series so far. Fantastic use of music, character writing, it's so well done. And during this flashback, we actually get more insight into why Ozen hates Rico. We see Liza introduce Torka, her husband, to Ozen in this flashback. And it's weird because Torka actually looks like a child. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe that's just his design and they wanted to make Liza taller, but it's just it's weird to see somebody look that young next to Liza and she's like, yeah, I'm marrying this dude. Later we see that Torka has perished, he's dead, and while giving birth to Rico in the abyss, she was stillborn, she was dead as well, and Liza is just broken. She's lying down and she just needs time alone. And they're in the 4th layer, so that's not anything small. Like, she just wants to spend some time alone. She needs time to think, because this would break anybody. This is tragic what happened to Liza. So Ozen makes a slight offhand remark that she pretty much hates Torka and Rico because of how they affected Liza's mental state, about how Liza was finally mellowing out and she's coming into her own, and this happens. But Riko's okay, and Liza later on grows to be fine. So I'm wondering if Ozen actually doesn't like Riko or not now. Like, what reason could she possibly have not to like Riko since Liza is fine now? Like, I really don't get it. And later on we'll learn that it really didn't affect anything with Liza going into the abyss either. Because that was my theory. I was like, okay, so now that she has a child and a husband, well, not a husband anymore, but now that she has a child, Ozen probably hates Riko because Liza is spending less time with Ozen and not going into the abyss anymore. But we find out that that's not true either later on. I'll talk about that later, but it's just interesting. And I wonder why Ozen doesn't like Riko, if she does. At this point, I'm starting to think that Ozen actually doesn't care about Riko. Like, Riko's just whatever to her. And she might actually have some fondness for her because she's Liza's child. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts on that. They actually split the flashback in two again in this episode, so I'll talk about the second half later in the video. Anyways, with that, survival training is over. The halfway point of the episode is done. And back at Secret Camp, Reg puts on his helmet, and he's apparently rejuvenated and fine now after 10 days in the wilderness. And after putting on his helmet, a symbol appears on his helmet. And Reg comments about it. He's like, oh, what's that? Was that always there? And then just forgets about it a second later. And I have no idea what to think about these symbols. I think maybe they might be signifying each layer, like each layer has a different symbol, or maybe his race is sending him a message of some sort. I have no idea what those symbols could be. It definitely has to do with his race, I imagine. And maybe even that helmet might be a relic itself that is influenced by the abyss. I don't know. So many theories. I'm sure I won't find out this season and I'll have to read the manga. One huge piece of information that I want to talk about, and this confused me, and I want some answers immediately in the comments, or whenever you want to, I don't care. Riko and Reg are eating dinner with Ozen, and Ozen gives them a piece of information that confuses the hell out of me. In her own words, one sense of time goes mad in the abyss, which means the time that you spend in the abyss isn't the same amount of time that's being spent on the surface or even in a deeper layer. Like, I guess the time fluctuation gets more and more slower or something the deeper you go down. Now, what I want to ask about this is it madness? Is it an illusion? Is it all in their head? Or is it an actual effect of the abyss that makes time slower? Because the way Ozen says it is that it's an illusion. It's something that you think you're spending a certain amount of time down there, but you're actually spending way longer. But the way it's communicated is that time actually slows down in the abyss. So is it a science or is it an illusion? I have no idea. I think that might be a translation thing because we're led to believe that it's actually a science in the abyss, that time slows down. It would explain a lot. It would explain why Ozen looks so young when she's supposed to be so old. And it would also explain why Liza was able to survive down in the deepest parts of the abyss for so long, because it wasn't actually that long for her. Which would mean when they meet her, she'll probably look almost the exact same as she did in these flashbacks. Let me know if that's been explained. Don't spoil if it's something that will be explained later, but if it's not a spoiler, feel free to tell me your thoughts on that. Now, this is the part of the episode where we get tons of world building, tons of information revelations. And that's what also made this episode so much better than a lot of the other episodes, is that we're learning a ton in this episode, and it's all really interesting information. For one, we learn about some of the other white whistles down in the abyss. Actually, I think it might be all of them. She says those are all the other white whistles down in the abyss. And we learn about every single one of them. In the manga, last chapter, or the chapter that was covering last episode, they actually gave the names of these white whistles, but they glossed over them last episode. Now I know why, because they wanted to bring them up this episode. We learn about 3 white whistles. The Sovereign of Guidance, Wakuna the Chosen, the Sovereign of Mystery, Plague Knight, Sraho or Srajo the Mysterious, and the Sovereign of Dawn, Bondrewd or Bondrewd the Novel. And they especially focus on Bondrewd. They say he is a vicious scoundrel, just a really evil person, and I'm so wanting to see him so bad. Everybody's hyping him up so much. I need to see this guy in action now. Hopefully, maybe they'll cliffhang it this season and we'll get that next season. If there is a season 2, please. Please, Kinema, please. Oh my god, I can't wait to see this dude. Even the anime is hyping him up now. The Sovereign of Dawn is such a badass name, too. I actually have this thought of what he sounds like in my head, too. I've never heard his voice, but I have this super clear and very definitive voice for him in my head. And if you want to know what that voice is, go watch ReZero. The character of Owl, that's what I picture him sounding like.
そら構うだろういろいろとほら行くぜ兄弟そうこんなよ姫さん可愛い顔が凶暴さで価値を落とすぜ
I so hope he sounds like that. If not, I'm sure I'll like whatever they choose for him, but that's what I'm picturing his voice as. After learning about those white whistles, we also learn about the note. Ozen said that the note was not written in Lyza's handwriting, and now she further extrapolates on that. We learn that the note was actually written in some really old nether relics that like isn't common on the surface or even what Ozen writes in. And we also learn that the paper in which the note is written on is actually a relic itself, and it cannot be teared, it cannot be ripped up at all, even by Ozen, who's super strong. So it's pretty likely at this point that Lyza sent that note, but the note was written by somebody else. That would also explain how they even got it up there without it being damaged in the first place. My guess is that Lyza is with Reg's race, and that Reg himself might actually be something that was sent up to Rico to help her come back down. That's crazy theories, I know, but it seems kind of likely. It seems kind of likely that maybe he was sent up to help Rico come back down to Lyza. I don't know what other reason there could be for why Reg, somebody who's found at the bottom of the abyss, is all the way at the top for some reason. We also learn about Lyza's pickaxe called the Blaze Reap, and somebody in the comments said last week, and they were right, this is Lyza's relic. It's like some kind of gun pickaxe or something. It shoots, it's supposedly an alternative to Reg's incinerator blast, so it must be pretty fucking powerful to be able to match that. In the future though, guys, I love the comments. Don't spoil something like that ahead of time, because I would love to be able to see those things and learn those things on my own, especially if it's like just next episode. Like, just wait a week, I'll get to it and I'll talk about it in this episode like I'm doing. And as if that world building and all those secrets weren't enough, Ozen actually says, okay, now I'm going to tell you all of the White Whistle secrets. And Rico and Reg actually learn a lot of information. We got kind of the skimmed over version of that information, but there's still a lot of interesting things that Ozen talked about. For one, now we know that there's some kind of ocean or sea in the 5th layer, and sea was in quotations. So I imagine that means it's not a normal sea, it's some kind of different kind of material sea or something. It's so cool sounding, so I need to see this. We also learned what somebody confirmed for me last episode, the White Whistle itself, the timber that it's made out of, is actually used to activate a certain class of relic. So it's not like one relic is tied to a White Whistle, it's that those White Whistles just activate all kinds of a class of relic. And finally, we learn about this mysterious ring on the 7th layer. I think this is the first time in the anime where they brought up the 7th layer, because I saw that diagram all the way back in episode 1, but that was from the manga. This is like the first episode that they're actually talking about the 7th layer, which is really cool. I can't wait to see all of these future layers, especially the 6th and 7th layers. Those are the ones that like really intrigue me the most. And I'm sure later on down the line, whether it's in the manga or like way later on in the line, we'll find out that there's an 8th layer or something. After all of those secrets are revealed, we cut to Rico and Reg departing the secret camp. We're at the edge of the 3rd layer, and we're saying our goodbyes to Ozen squad members and Marlock. Ozen didn't come to join us, it's just those guys. Although we do see that she's still watching them, but Ozen didn't really care to say goodbye to them, and it makes sense. And during this scene, we get probably the second most emotional scene in the entire series thus far. Number one, of course, being the Nat scene at the end of episode 3, the reason why I love that episode so much, and ironically, this scene with Marlook saying goodbye to Rico and Reg, such an emotional send-off, probably one of the main reasons why I love this episode so much. I love these more emotional scenes, because it feels like a lot of our journey has been kind of straight-faced, like Rico's really determined, Reg is determined. There's not a lot of time to just settle down and realize the gravity of the situation and just get an emotional scene like this. But Marlook, and I know I changed the pronunciation of that name, Marlook, I don't know. I'm gonna say Marlook, end of story. I probably won't have to worry about it after this episode anyways. But Marlook is just saying goodbye, and he's so torn up. He says, you know, I know it sounds terrible to say, but I really would love for you guys to come back and say it was impossible and stay here with me. Because this is the first time that anybody his age has ever come down, and probably the quickest he's ever bonded with anybody. It's very emotional. I love the writing on him. They played the insert ending from the first episode. God bless Penkin. Penkin is our hero, our savior. Best OST of the year so far, in my opinion. All of those things just came together and created such a powerful scene to end the episode on. Oh, but wait. While that ending song is playing, we also get Ozen's flashback part 2, which makes that flashback even more emotional as well. During the second part of the flashback, we actually see Jiro. We finally learn his name officially, because I saw it on Mel. I was like, wait, when did we ever hear Jiro? He's always just been called Leader, but his name is Jiro or Jiro, I don't know. I'm just going to keep calling him Leader. But we learned that in Ozen's flashback that Leader actually turned down Ozen as a master because Lyza was way cooler than her, I guess. I just love how straightforward he is even as a child. But the real meat of this flashback is Ozen and Lyza talking at the orphanage. I don't know what their connection to the orphanage is, other than the fact that they probably left Rico there. I guess this might be right after they dropped Rico off or something. Actually, now that I think about it, Lyza probably was brought up in the orphanage, and that's where Ozen found her, which explains the connection. So no need to answer that in the comments. I think I figured that out on my own just now. Anyways, they're talking, and Ozen remarks on how Lyza pretty much had to abandon Rico, and we actually learn this goes back way back to episode 2. When I asked a question, I said I felt like they didn't build Lyza up well enough because nobody talked about how Rico's mother was somebody so important. And in this episode, somebody back then said, don't worry, you'll get the answer way later on. And this episode, I finally got it. That I didn't get spoiled on this. I don't know how. Thank you for not spoiling this in the comments. This was a really cool revelation to make. Apparently, it's a mystery. It's supposed to be a secret that Rico is the daughter of Lyza, which would explain why Rico is not treated as anybody special, and why the only people who know are those really higher up people like Habo or Leader, and they just don't care. They'll treat her normally anyways. But my question is how? How did she keep this a secret? Because Rico herself knew her mother's name. She said, Lyza. Lyza's my mom's name. How was this kept a secret by anybody? Especially with Rico being the one who knows these things. Like, Rico could have told everybody, and I'm pretty sure she's told a few people already. So is it just that nobody believes her and that's why it hadn't spread or something? I don't know. That's just a minor little nitpick I found. I was like, wait, how did Rico never give this away to anybody as a child? We also learn why Lyza left Rico in the first place, and she kind of pulls a complete Jing here. Somebody whose aspirations and goals basically outweighed the responsibility of raising their child. Honestly, the Jing comparison is really accurate when I think about it. Both are parental figures that left their child around birth and are waiting for them to catch up to them in their own aspirations. So I wonder if the author actually drew inspiration for Lyza from Jing. It doesn't seem that far-fetched to me now that I think about it. But yeah, we learned that Lyza basically left Rico not only... It's twofold. She left Rico not only for her own aspirations. She says her reasoning is that she wants Rico to live her own life, to follow her own path, and she thinks that Rico wouldn't be able to do that if she took care of her, because then they'd be kind of shackled down into their house life and they would never leave that. And at the same time, Ozen actually comments, she's like, aren't you forgetting the other reason? You want to see the bottom of the abyss yourself, and taking care of Riko would separate you from the abyss. So I think that's a really interesting character dynamic. I know a lot of people will probably say the same thing they say for Jing. Oh, what a terrible father. Oh, what a terrible mother that she would do that. But I think it's a really fascinating character archetype that we don't really see a lot. And I like the idea of a parent being so caught up in their aspirations and their goals that they leave their child to grow up on their own and then follow after them. And I guess that is kind of bad parenting, but it makes for a really interesting character in my opinion. At the end of this flashback, we get some amazing dialogue. This final scene is probably where it cemented the episode itself as like, wow, this episode was fantastic. That glorious Penkin track in the background. We finally get to see Liza's face. As I was watching that, I was like, thumbnail. Thumbnail, thumbnail, thumbnail. And I know everybody's going to use that shot of Liza as the thumbnail probably, but it's too good not to. I'm sorry. And one of my favorite aspects about the flashback and the scene following the flashback is we got to see a lot softer side to Ozen than we usually do. And it made me love her character even more. Like, Ozen's just a normal person deep down, and she cares for Liza a lot. I love seeing interesting dynamics on characters that you thought were only one way, but then they show you that they're not just that one way. They have multiple aspects to themselves. At the very end of the episode, we see Riko and Reg at the very edge of the third layer, the Great Fault. This is the layer that I looked at the beginning of the series when they were doing the overview of the Abyss, and I was like, how? How are they going to scale this massive cliffside? And I guess we'll find out next episode. And apparently next episode is when we're going to be meeting Nanachi, so I'm wondering how she factors into this huge cliffside. Like, how are they going to meet her? Are they just gonna like montage past the third layer and suddenly be in the fourth layer or something? I mean, that doesn't seem too unlikely, because I don't know how they would meet Nanachi on this giant cliff face rock. Like, unless she's just randomly in a wall somewhere as they're descending down, I guess. I don't know, that sounds really weird to me, but I'm ready for next episode. There was a point, these past few episodes, I've kind of been feeling weird about this series because I loved it so much in the beginning, and it kind of lost steam a little bit for me. It picked that steam back up, like, in this episode, and I'm hoping it keeps that steam all the way to the finale. I can deal with a little bit of a slow midsection as long as these last few episodes are fantastic, and this episode was fantastic. Such a good episode. I'm so ready for more. Can't wait for next week. Hope you guys will join me next week for next week's review, The Great Fault. Thank you all for the comments again. I feel like I have to say that every episode because there are just more and more comments every single episode, and I cannot say how much I appreciate that enough. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.
I shall find